Have you ever noticed how the moment you stop trying, she suddenly starts paying attention? It's not magic, it's psychology. Today, we're breaking down the exact triggers that make a woman start missing you the second you pull your energy back. If you've ever wondered why distance can flip her entire mindset, this is where you finally get your answers. When you consistently show up for a woman, whether through attention, communication, emotional support, or presence, you create an emotional rhythm that becomes familiar to her. Humans are creatures of habit, especially in relationships. We get used to how someone makes us feel, how quickly they respond, how often they check in, and the emotional safety they provide. This routine becomes part of her internal world, often without her even realizing it. Emotional pattern disruption happens the moment you pull back from this routine. It's not about manipulation, it's about the psychological impact of breaking a pattern she unconsciously began to rely on. When you step back, the first thing she notices is not the silence itself, it's the sudden shift from what her mind has grown accustomed to. Her brain goes into a mild state of confusion because the emotional consistency she counted on is no longer there. This disruption forces her to pay attention. It creates a moment where she pauses and evaluates what changed and, more importantly, why it changed. This shift is powerful because the human mind responds more strongly to what disappears unexpectedly than to what is steadily present. As the pattern breaks, she begins to feel a subtle emotional discomfort. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a lingering thought. Why hasn't he called? Other times it's a deep, unsettling feeling that something is off. This discomfort grows not because of your absence alone, but because your absence highlights the emotional value she used to receive from you. What she once took for granted now becomes noticeable. The pattern she lived in starts revealing its importance only after it's disrupted. This disruption also creates a psychological pull. When something or someone is always available, the brain adapts and stops registering the value as strongly. But when availability decreases, the mind wakes up. It becomes more alert, more focused, and more emotionally reactive. This heightened emotional response makes her begin to miss the connection she once enjoyed effortlessly. She becomes more aware of the role you played in her daily emotional stability, even if she never consciously acknowledged it before. Another layer of emotional pattern disruption is the way it activates memory recall. When you pull away, her mind starts replaying past interactions, conversations, gestures, and moments where she felt valued or understood by you. The brain tries to restore the pattern by revisiting what used to fill that emotional space. These memories become sharper because the contrast between what was and what is now grows wider. This is often the moment she starts to miss not just you, but the way your presence made her feel about herself. Over time, the disruption leads to emotional curiosity. She begins asking questions internally. Was he upset? Did I do something? Has he changed his mind about me? This curiosity is not just about you, it's about her sense of connection and emotional security. When the pattern breaks, it forces her to reflect on her own behavior and emotional investment. She becomes more aware of how much attention you truly gave, how emotionally present you were, and how comfortable she had become with it. As this internal conflict intensifies, she may experience a subtle emotional withdrawal from her own perspective. The absence of your energy creates a vacuum. Humans naturally try to fill emotional vacuums, and she often does this through seeking reconnection, initiating conversations, or becoming more attentive. The disruption pulls her toward you, not because you demanded it, but because her emotional world is trying to rebuild the pattern she has lost. This is why emotional pattern disruption is such a powerful trigger. It is not about playing games. It is about understanding that when your presence becomes predictable, the emotional impact weakens. But when the pattern shifts unexpectedly, the emotional awareness strengthens, and that is the moment she begins to truly miss you. The scarcity effect is one of the strongest psychological principles influencing human behavior, especially in relationships. When something is abundant, the mind relaxes and assumes it will always be available. When something becomes limited or less accessible, its perceived value increases instantly. This principle doesn't just apply to objects, it deeply applies to people, attention, and emotional presence. When you pull away, you shift from being emotionally abundant to emotionally scarce. That shift alone triggers a powerful internal response in a woman's mind, often making her realize your importance in a way she didn't before. For a woman who had consistent access to your presence, your messages, calls, care, emotional reassurance, the moment that access decreases, she subconsciously feels the scarcity. It creates a sense of urgency within her because the emotional supply she grew accustomed to is no longer flowing freely. Suddenly, she can't predict when you'll text or how available you'll be. This unpredictability increases how much she thinks about you, checks her phone, or replays recent interactions in her head. Her emotional system begins searching for what is missing, and that longing makes your presence feel more valuable. What's important here is that scarcity doesn't mean disappearing or purposely ignoring her. It means stepping back just enough for her to notice the contrast. Humans place more value on what they feel they might lose than on what they feel they already have. When you are always available, she may have subconsciously placed you in the guaranteed category. She knew your effort, your consistency, and your emotional availability were always there. But when her access to you becomes limited, she's forced to reevaluate that assumption. She begins to realize that your presence was not guaranteed, it was given. That realization shifts her perception significantly. The scarcity effect also activates something called emotional magnification. When she feels she has less access to you, every small interaction becomes more meaningful. A short message from you suddenly feels more important than a long conversation once did. A simple acknowledgement becomes emotionally charged because it breaks the scarcity pattern. Her mind magnifies your actions precisely because they are no longer predictable or easily accessible. Your reduced availability increases the emotional weight of even your smallest behaviors. Another psychological layer is relational focus. When you are consistently available, her mind could spread its attention across many things: routine, work, friends, daily life. But when you pull away and become scarce, her focus narrows. The mind naturally pays more attention to the thing that is missing, not the things that are present. This narrowing of focus makes her think more deeply, reflect more intensely, and feel more emotionally connected to you, even in your absence. She becomes more conscious of how she felt when you were around and more aware of what she feels without you. Scarcity also pushes her into self-reflection. She may begin questioning whether she contributed to your distance or whether she took your effort for granted. This reflection doesn't come from guilt. It comes from the instinctive need to protect something of emotional value. When she feels she might lose your presence, she starts analyzing her own behavior, recalling moments she may have overlooked, and recognizing the consistency you brought into her life. This self-awareness often leads her to appreciate your presence in a deeper way. The scarcity effect triggers motivation as well. When access becomes limited, the desire to regain it increases. She may reach out more quickly, initiate conversations, or show more emotional openness than before. Her efforts aren't random. They're driven by the emotional pressure scarcity creates. She wants to reduce the feeling of uncertainty and restore the emotional stability your presence once provided. The mind naturally tries to rebuild what feels endangered, and that desire intensifies the sense of missing you. What makes the scarcity effect so powerful is that it shifts internal perception without you having to do anything extreme. The moment you reduce your emotional availability, her mind automatically recalculates your value. You didn't change who you are, you changed how accessible you are, and that alone makes her start to miss you at a deeper, more instinctive level. A shift in the power dynamic occurs the moment you pull your energy back, especially if you were the one consistently giving more, initiating more, or emotionally investing more. In many relationships, the person who gives the most attention naturally ends up with less power, not because they are weaker, but because their effort becomes predictable. When a woman knows you will always show up first, always reassure her, always fix things, or always be the one to reach out, she subconsciously settles into a position of comfort. That comfort slowly turns into emotional dominance, even if she never intended it. Your presence becomes the constant, while her presence becomes the variable. When you pull away, the dynamic begins to rebalance. She can no longer assume that you will be the emotional anchor holding the connection in place. Suddenly, the certainty she once had starts shifting. Instead of you chasing the connection, she now feels the pressure of maintaining it. This is the moment she realizes the emotional weight you carried, weight she may not have fully acknowledged before. This change is not about authority or control, it is about recalibrating emotional responsibility within the relationship. As the power dynamic shifts, she begins to feel something she may not have felt for a while: emotional accountability. When you were always the one trying, she never had to analyze her own behavior deeply. She never had to question whether she was reciprocating at the same level or whether she was contributing enough. But when you step back, a mirror appears in front of her. She is forced to assess her own role, her effort, her presence, and her contribution. This reflection can be uncomfortable, but it is incredibly powerful because it activates emotional awareness. This shift also challenges her internal expectations. If she previously felt that your attention or admiration was guaranteed, she now faces the reality that it was never one-sided, and it certainly wasn't effortless. Your pulling away reveals something she may have overlooked. You are not emotionally dependent on her. That realization changes everything. It makes her reassess the value of your attention and the significance of your presence. She begins to understand that your investment was a choice, not an obligation. Another part of this power shift is emotional imbalance turning into emotional curiosity. When she feels the dynamic changing, she becomes more curious about your thoughts, your feelings, and your intentions. She starts noticing things she didn't pay attention to before. Did your tone change? Are you still as responsive? Are you still as emotionally open? This curiosity pushes her to re-engage on a deeper level because she wants to understand what is happening. The desire to regain clarity and stability makes her think about you more intensely. The shift in power also brings vulnerability into her experience. When she senses that you are no longer centered around her or that your emotional energy is being redirected, she feels a loss of control. This loss is not dramatic, it's subtle and psychological. She becomes more aware of how much you mattered, how much your consistency meant, and how much emotional influence you actually had. The vulnerability she now feels is the same vulnerability you may have felt in the past when the dynamic was reversed. In this new balance, she begins to take more initiative. She may reach out first, check in more frequently, or show more genuine effort. These changes are not random reactions. They are a direct response to the shift in emotional power. Her actions reflect her desire to restore the connection and reduce the emotional uncertainty she is experiencing. The more you step back with calmness and self-respect, the more she steps forward with intention. What makes this shift so impactful is that it reveals the truth about connection. Emotional power is not about controlling someone. It is about how effort, attention, and presence flow between two people. When you pull away, you interrupt the old flow and create space for balance. In that balance, she finally feels the weight of your absence and begins to recognize the true value of your presence. Internal comparison is one of the strongest emotional reactions a woman experiences the moment you pull away. It happens automatically, often without conscious awareness. When your presence is steady, your attention, your calls, your reassurance, her mind gets used to it. It becomes her baseline. But when you suddenly step back, that baseline shifts, and her mind instinctively begins comparing how she felt with you to how she feels without you. This psychological comparison is powerful because the brain is designed to evaluate changes, not constants. Your absence becomes a trigger that activates emotional evaluation at a deeper level. When a woman is accustomed to your energy being part of her emotional world, she naturally forms an internal standard of what it feels like to be connected to you, whether it's your consistency, your emotional support, or the simple comfort of knowing you're there. These experiences create an emotional imprint. The moment you pull away, that imprint becomes the reference point she compares everything against. It's not something she chooses to do, it's a built-in psychological response. The brain always tries to make sense of contrast, and the contrast between with you and without you becomes extremely noticeable. As she experiences the silence or reduced attention, small things start triggering comparisons. She may notice how her day feels a little emptier, how her routine lacks warmth, or how her mood doesn't feel as stable. She might compare the emotional ease she had with you to the uncertainty she now feels. These comparisons intensify because the mind amplifies the importance of what it perceives as lost. This is why even a small amount of distance can make her thoughts pull toward you. She starts remembering moments that once felt ordinary but now feel significant because the emotional contrast highlights their value. Internal comparison also activates selective memory. She starts recalling the best parts of your connection, your kindness, your attention, your reliability, your presence. The mind rarely brings up the frustrating moments when scarcity is present. Instead, it focuses on emotional highs, not lows. She remembers the way you listened, the way you made her feel seen, or the way you added stability to her life. These memories resurface because the brain tries to restore emotional balance through recollection. The more these memories replay, the stronger the sense of missing you becomes. Another psychological layer emerges when she compares you to others. When you are present and giving, she may not have noticed the gap between how you treat her and how others treat her. But the moment you pull away, that comparison becomes clearer. She notices that other people don't communicate with the same consistency, don't understand her in the same way, or don't connect with her emotionally the way you did. This comparison strengthens your emotional value without you doing anything. Her mind naturally positions you as the one who stood out, not the one who blended in. This internal comparison becomes even stronger when she evaluates her own behavior. She starts reflecting on whether she appreciated your effort enough while she had it. She compares how she responded to your attention then versus how she feels now. This creates emotional friction, a sense of regret or awareness that maybe she didn't reciprocate fully. This emotional friction is what makes her miss you more intensely. It's not just the absence, it's the realization that she may have overlooked something meaningful. Internal comparison also activates the desire for emotional alignment. When she realizes that she felt more emotionally centered, more confident, or more grounded when you were consistently present, she begins craving that emotional state again. The comparison between emotional stability with you and emotional instability without you becomes a motivator. It pushes her to think about reconnecting, to initiate contact, or to reconsider the way she valued the relationship. What makes internal comparison so impactful is that it happens inside her mind, not through your actions. You don't need to remind her of your worth. You don't need to prove anything. The comparison reveals it for you. When you pull away, she becomes the one replaying memories, analyzing emotions, and realizing what your presence truly meant. The contrast between the emotional comfort you provided and the emotional gap your absence creates becomes the very thing that makes her start missing you on a deeper, more reflective level. Fear of emotional loss is one of the strongest psychological drivers behind why a woman suddenly starts missing you the moment you pull away. This fear isn't loud or dramatic, it is subtle, internal, and deeply rooted in human attachment. When someone has become a meaningful part of her emotional world, even in small ways, the possibility of losing that connection can trigger an immediate shift inside her. The fear doesn't come from desperation. It comes from the realization that something emotionally valuable may no longer be guaranteed. When you are present, consistent, and emotionally reliable, she subconsciously built a sense of security around your presence. Whether she admitted it or not, she grew accustomed to the way you made her feel, to the comfort of your attention, and to the emotional reassurance your presence brought. People often don't recognize how much emotional stability someone gives them until that stability is disrupted. The moment you pull away, even slightly, her mind detects a threat. That threat is the potential loss of a connection she didn't fully appreciate until it was no longer within reach. The fear of emotional loss activates the attachment system, the part of the mind that reacts when someone important becomes distant. This system is wired to protect valuable bonds. When she senses distance, her brain sends signals encouraging her to reconnect, to re-establish closeness, or at least to understand why the shift occurred. This is why she may suddenly think about you more, replay conversations, or feel uneasy without any clear reason. Her attachment instincts are trying to prevent the loss before it becomes permanent. This fear also creates emotional urgency. When you were fully available, she may not have felt any pressure to reciprocate at the same depth. But when she feels you pulling away, that lack of urgency is replaced with concern. She starts worrying that she might lose something meaningful, and that worry pushes her into emotional reflection. She begins asking herself questions she didn't ask before. Did I do something wrong? Was I distant? Did I take him for granted? These questions don't just arise out of guilt, they arise out of the fear that her actions may have contributed to the emotional distance she now senses. Fear of emotional loss also brings clarity. When she feels that she might lose you, her mind becomes more aware of the positive emotions you brought into her life. She realizes the comfort your consistency gave her, the stability your presence provided, and the emotional support she may have overlooked. This clarity often appears suddenly because fear sharpens perception. It forces her to see what she couldn't see before, the value of having someone who genuinely cared. Another important layer is the fear of losing a safe emotional space. If you were someone she trusted, confided in, or felt understood by, the possibility of losing that emotional safety creates a deeper internal reaction. Emotional safety is rare. Once someone experiences it, the thought of losing it feels unsettling. Even if she didn't express it outwardly, that sense of safety mattered to her. When you pull away, she feels the gap left behind, not just the loss of communication, but the loss of emotional grounding. This fear also triggers comparisons between you and past experiences. If she has ever experienced abandonment, inconsistency, or emotional neglect in previous relationships, your distance might connect with those old emotional patterns. That doesn't mean she's blaming you. It means her mind is reacting to familiar emotional signals. The fear becomes stronger because it taps into deeper emotional memories, pushing her to hold on to what feels secure. As this fear grows, she becomes more sensitive to your absence. Things that once seemed normal, delayed replies, shorter conversations, less effort, now feel meaningful. She reads into them not because she's overthinking, but because the fear of emotional loss makes her more alert. Her mind is scanning for signs, trying to understand whether the connection is slipping away. This heightened awareness intensifies the emotional attachment she feels toward you. What makes fear of emotional loss so powerful is that it transforms passive emotions into active ones. The moment she senses that you might no longer be accessible, she begins to miss you. Not just because you're gone, but because the possibility of losing you forces her to acknowledge what you truly meant to her. The reevaluation phase is one of the most defining psychological stages a woman enters the moment you pull your energy back. It is the period where she begins reassessing not only the relationship, but also her feelings, your role in her life, and the value of the connection. This phase is triggered by the sudden shift in emotional dynamics. When your presence was consistent, she never had to deeply analyze what you brought into her life because it was always available. But when that consistency changes, her mind naturally begins evaluating everything she may have overlooked. This reevaluation doesn't happen all at once. It starts gradually, often with a single question. Why does this feel different now? That small internal shift opens the door to deeper reflection. She starts thinking about how she felt when you were fully engaged compared to how she feels now that your presence has reduced. This contrast pushes her to re-examine the emotional value you added to her life, value she might not have fully understood when she had it every day. She begins questioning her own behavior, her responses, and the way she treated the connection when it was at its strongest. During this stage, she reflects on the qualities you brought into the relationship. She may think about your consistency, your emotional support, the effort you put in, the security you offered, and the stability you provided. These qualities become clearer to her because your absence allows her to view them from a distance. It's very common for people to appreciate a presence more when it becomes less predictable. The reevaluation phase makes her recognize strengths, actions, and gestures that previously blended into the background. What she once saw as routine now stands out as meaningful. The reevaluation phase also forces her to examine her own emotional investment. She begins thinking about whether she matched your effort, whether she valued you enough, or whether she allowed herself to become passive in the connection. These reflections are not meant to guilt her. They arise naturally because the brain seeks balance. When she senses emotional imbalance due to your withdrawal, she becomes more aware of her own actions and whether she contributed to the shift. This awareness can trigger a desire to correct, adjust, or deepen her involvement. Another part of the reevaluation phase is how she starts viewing the relationship from a long-term perspective. When you were consistently present, she may not have felt any urgency to define her feelings or intentions. But distance creates clarity. She starts imagining what life feels like without you, what emotional gaps appear in your absence, and what aspects of her life felt stronger with you around. These realizations often lead her to understand that the connection was more important than she initially acknowledged. She may also begin comparing the way you made her feel with how other people make her feel. The emotional contrast becomes sharper during this phase. Your empathy, attention, or understanding stands out against the interactions she has with others. This comparison isn't something she consciously chooses. It's part of the mental process of evaluating emotional significance. She starts seeing that not everyone offers the same level of emotional depth or consistency that you did, and that realization enhances your value in her mind. The reevaluation phase often brings emotional vulnerability. She becomes aware of the possibility of losing something meaningful, and that awareness pushes her to rethink her priorities. She may recognize that she misinterpreted your presence as guaranteed or underestimated the emotional role you played. This vulnerability is what makes her miss you more intensely because it connects her desire for emotional security with the recognition of what she could be losing. During this phase, she also reconsiders her expectations. She thinks about whether she placed too much weight on minor issues, overlooked important qualities, or allowed fear, pride, or complacency to influence her behavior. The space your distance creates allows her to see things more objectively. She can finally acknowledge qualities she admired, moments she cherished, and efforts she didn't reciprocate enough. This level of clarity only emerges when emotional noise settles. Ultimately, the reevaluation phase is the moment when she begins understanding the connection from a deeper, more meaningful perspective. It is the internal shift that makes her realize the emotional value you brought into her life, the stability you created, and the presence she may not have appreciated fully until it was no longer constant.